Don't worry, Dad. Everything is under control. You just step away.
Have you ever wondered what makes a legend? John Wesley Hardin, a name synonymous with the Wild West, was famed for his deadly aim and quick draw.
Shoot him. Or I'll shoot you.
But was he merely a ruthless outlaw or a misunderstood soul shaped by his era? Let's saddle up and journey into the life of one of the Old West's most enigmatic figures, where myth and reality blur in the dust of history. Early life and formative years. Born on May 26, 1853 in Bonham, Texas, John Wesley Hardin was the second of 10 children. His father, James Gibson Hardin, was a Methodist preacher, and his mother, Elizabeth Hardin, was the daughter of a Texas pioneer. Despite his father's religious vocation, the family was not stranger to violence. Texas during Hardin's childhood was a place where disputes were often settled with guns. Hardin's upbringing was steeped in the turmoil of the times. The Civil War and Reconstruction left Texas in a state of social and political upheaval. Violence and lawlessness were commonplace, shaping the young Hardin's worldview. He grew up hearing tales of heroes and outlaws, with figures like Sam Houston and Santa Anna looming large in Texan lore. These stories, combined with the chaotic environment of post-war Texas, undoubtedly influenced his path. Hardin showed an early aptitude for handling firearms. By the age of 10, he was already proficient with a gun, a skill that was not unusual in frontier Texas, but still remarkable for someone so young. His skill with a pistol quickly became a defining trait, setting the stage for his later life. His first brush with violence came at a tender age. According to Hardin's own account, when he was just 14, he stabbed a fellow student in a schoolyard scuffle. This incident was a harbinger of the violent path his life would take. However, it's important to note that much of what we know about Hardin's early life comes from his own accounts, written in later years. These narratives are often tinted with bravado and self-justification, a common trait among outlaws of his time who sought to paint themselves as heroes of their own stories. Hardin's first confirmed kill occurred when he was 15, an event that marked his transition from troubled youth to fledgling outlaw. The incident arose from a heated argument with a former slave, culminating in Hardin shooting him. This act of violence was a pivotal moment, setting Hardin on a path from which there was no return. It was the beginning of a life marked by frequent violence and skirmishes with the law. In the years that followed, Hardin's reputation grew. He became known not just for his quick temper and quicker draw, but also for his ability to evade capture. He traveled across Texas, getting involved in various altercations that added to his notoriety. Hardin's family played a significant role in his formative years. His father's status as a preacher didn't prevent him from teaching his son to use a gun. This dichotomy between the religious upbringing and the acceptance of violence reflects the complexities of frontier life in Texas. The state, still grappling with the aftermath of the Civil War, was a place where law and order were often secondary to personal justice and survival. First gunfight and the road to notoriety. The first gunshot that echoed from John Wesley Hardin's pistol, signaling his entry into outlaw legend, was fired when he was a mere 15 years old. This pivotal moment in 1868 marked the beginning of a path steeped in violence and infamy, one that would cement Hardin's name in the annals of Wild West lore. It was in late summer when Hardin committed what he would later refer to as his first act of self-defense. The incident involved a former slave named Mage, who, according to Hardin, had become increasingly hostile towards him. The exact nature of their conflict varies in different accounts, but it culminated in Hardin shooting Mage 3 times with a Colt .44, a decision that irreversibly altered the course of his life. This incident is a striking example of the lawless and racially charged atmosphere of post-Civil War Texas. Hardin, barely more than a child, had already adopted the prevailing belief that personal grievances were best settled with a gun. The shooting was not just a manifestation of personal animosity, it was a product of the times, reflecting the societal norms and tensions of Reconstruction-era Texas. Hardin's life post-Mage shooting was a whirlwind of violence and evasion. Fleeing from the law, he adopted the life of a drifter. His journey through Texas was marked by a series of altercations, each adding to his growing reputation as a dangerous man. One notable incident occurred in Navarro County, where Hardin claimed to have killed 3 Union soldiers in self-defense. These killings, whether factual or exaggerated, were significant in building the myth around Hardin. He portrayed himself as a Confederate sympathizer, fighting against the injustices of Reconstruction. This narrative resonated with many in the South, who viewed him as a symbol of resistance against the Union-imposed order. As his notoriety grew, so did the tales of his exploits. Hardin was said to be unmatched in speed and accuracy with a pistol. Stories circulated about his ability to outdraw and outshoot anyone who crossed him. These accounts, often embellished or romanticized, contributed to the legend of Hardin as the deadliest gunslinger in the Old West. It's essential to sift through these tales for the truth. While Hardin was undoubtedly a skilled gunman, some of the stories about him were likely exaggerated. This era was ripe with folklore and tall tales, and outlaws like Hardin often became larger-than-life figures in the public imagination. As Hardin's fame spread, so did the efforts to capture him. He was constantly on the move, evading lawmen and bounty hunters. His life was one of perpetual vigilance, always looking over his shoulder for the next threat. This constant state of flight was taxing, but it also added to his legend. Hardin was not just an outlaw. He was an elusive ghost, always one step ahead of the law. Hardin's involvement in the Sutton-Taylor feud further cemented his notoriety. This bloody conflict between 2 prominent Texas families saw Hardin aligning with the Taylors. His participation in the feud was a clear indication of his willingness to engage in violent conflicts, further entrenching him in a life of lawlessness. The feud was one of the most notorious episodes in Texas history, and Hardin's involvement in it was significant. It was during this period that he committed some of his most disputed acts of violence. The line between fact and fiction blurs in the accounts of these events, but Hardin's role in the feud is indisputable. By his early 20s, John Wesley Hardin was already a legend. He had transformed from a troubled youth into a feared gunslinger, his name synonymous with danger and death. His journey to this point was marked by bloodshed and conflict, a testament to both his personal choices and the tumultuous times in which he lived. Hardin's heyday, a life on the run. The period following John Wesley Hardin's early brush with lawlessness ushered in what could be termed his heyday, a time characterized by notorious gunfights, remarkable escapes, and a life constantly shadowed by danger. This era solidified Hardin's reputation as a legendary figure of the Old West. Hardin's life during this period was marked by a series of violent encounters and narrow escapes. One of the most infamous of these was the killing of Deputy Sheriff Charles Webb in 1874. This incident led to Hardin becoming one of the most wanted men in Texas, with a hefty price on his head. The killing was a turning point, escalating his status from a local troublemaker to a nationally recognized outlaw. In his mid-20s, Hardin's knack for evading capture became almost as legendary as his skill with a gun. He often recounted tales of his escapes, adding a layer of myth to his already formidable reputation. Whether it was slipping away from lawmen in the dead of night or narrowly avoiding ambushes, Hardin seemed to possess an uncanny ability to stay one step ahead of his pursuers. During these years, Hardin embraced his life as an outlaw. He traveled across Texas and into other states, often using aliases to avoid detection. Despite his criminal activities, he garnered a certain amount of public sympathy, seen by some as a sort of folk hero, a symbol of defiance against what they perceived as an oppressive government. This public perception was a complex mix of admiration, fear, and fascination. Hardin's exploits were often romanticized in the press and by word of mouth, painting him as a Robin Hood-like figure. However, for law enforcement and those who suffered at his hands, he was nothing short of a cold-blooded killer. The 1870s were a time of significant change in the American West. The era of the untamed frontier was giving way to a more ordered and lawful society. Towns were growing, railroads were expanding, and the influence of the federal government was increasingly felt. In this changing landscape, outlaws like Hardin were becoming anachronisms, remnants of a wilder, more lawless time. Hardin's activities during this period can be seen as a reaction against these changes. His lifestyle, based on the gun and the quick draw, was becoming outdated. Yet he clung to it, embodying the spirit of the Old West even as it was passing into history. Hardin crossed paths with several notable figures during his heyday. One such individual was Wild Bill Hickok. Although accounts of their interactions vary, Hardin claimed to have outdrawn Hickok in a confrontation. Whether this encounter happened as Hardin described it is debatable, but it adds to the tapestry of his legend. Amidst his life of crime, Hardin also experienced moments of normalcy. He married Jane Bowen in 1871 and had 3 children with her. This aspect of his life offers a stark contrast to his public persona. It shows a man capable of love and affection, far removed from the ruthless outlaw image. Living as a fugitive took its toll on Hardin. Constantly being on the move, looking over his shoulder and engaging in violence had both physical and psychological impacts. It was a stressful, often lonely existence, fraught with danger at every turn. In 1877, after nearly a decade of evading the law, Hardin's luck finally ran out. He was captured by Texas Rangers in Florida. His arrest marked the end of a significant chapter in his life and the beginning of another equally tumultuous one. Captured, Hardin's time behind bars. The capture of John Wesley Hardin in 1877 marked the end of his tumultuous career as an outlaw and the beginning of a new chapter in his life, one characterized by confinement and introspection. Hardin's time behind bars was a period of dramatic transformation and reflection, offering a different perspective on the notorious gunslinger. John Wesley Hardin's capture by Texas Rangers in Pensacola, Florida, was a significant event. The Rangers, led by John B. Armstrong, had tracked Hardin across multiple states, finally apprehending him in a dramatic encounter. Hardin, who had so skillfully evaded capture for years, found himself ensnared at last. His trial was a major event, drawing considerable public attention. Hardin faced charges for the murder of Deputy Sheriff Charles Webb, an act that had made him one of the most wanted men in Texas. Despite his efforts to defend himself, Hardin was found guilty and sentenced to 25 years in prison in 1878. This verdict marked the end of his notorious career as a free man and the beginning of a long period of incarceration. Life behind bars was a stark contrast to the freedom and chaos of Hardin's previous existence. He was initially incarcerated in the Huntsville prison, where he spent most of his sentence. Prison life was harsh and regimented, a far cry from the lawless freedom of the open road. However, Hardin adapted to his new environment with surprising resilience. In prison, Hardin underwent a significant transformation. He claimed to have found religion and even studied law, passing the bar examination. These pursuits showed a side of Hardin that was previously overshadowed by his reputation as a gunslinger. He engaged in intellectual activities, wrote poetry, and corresponded with family and friends. Hardin's time in prison was marked by attempts at reform. He professed a change of heart and sought to distance himself from his violent past. Hardin's efforts to reinvent himself were met with skepticism by many, but they provided a glimpse into the complexities of his character. This period of introspection and apparent reform was a fascinating chapter in Hardin's life. It suggested that beneath the hardened exterior of the outlaw, there was a man capable of reflection and change. However, the extent of his transformation remains a subject of debate among historians. Even in prison, Hardin's influence and charisma were evident. He became a well-known figure among the inmates and guards, maintaining a certain level of respect and authority. His relationships with fellow prisoners and prison staff were complex, reflecting his charismatic yet unpredictable nature. Hardin's time in prison also affected his family life. His wife, Jane, passed away while he was incarcerated, leaving him to grapple with loss and regret. This personal tragedy added another layer of complexity to Hardin's time behind bars. Hardin's prison years were not without controversies and conflicts. He was involved in various incidents, including altercations with other inmates and attempts to bend the rules. These episodes indicated that, despite his claims of reform, Hardin still struggled with the impulses and behaviors that had defined much of his life. After serving 17 years, Hardin was released from prison in 1894 due to good behavior and the influence of his legal studies. His release was a significant moment, marking his return to society after nearly 2 decades of confinement. Upon his release, Hardin attempted to lead a lawful life. He moved to El Paso, Texas, where he set up a legal practice. However, his reputation as a notorious outlaw followed him, making it difficult to fully escape his past. Final years and legacy. The final years of John Wesley Hardin's life, following his release from prison, were a mixture of attempted redemption and an inevitable relapse into old habits. This period, leading up to his untimely death and the legacy that ensued, offers a concluding chapter to the turbulent saga of one of the Old West's most infamous figures. In 1894, after 17 years behind bars, Hardin stepped back into a world vastly different from the one he had left. He relocated to El Paso, Texas, endeavoring to start afresh. With his newfound legal knowledge, he opened a law practice, hoping to integrate into society as a reformed man. However, the shadow of his past loomed large, and his reputation as a notorious gunslinger complicated his efforts. Hardin's return to society was fraught with challenges. He struggled to adjust to the norms of a world that had moved on without him. The Wild West he knew was fading into history, replaced by a more civilized and orderly society. This transition was difficult for Hardin, who found himself a relic of a bygone era. Hardin's efforts to lead a peaceful life were short-lived. He soon fell back into old patterns, frequenting saloons and getting involved in altercations. His demise came on August 19, 1895, in a manner befitting the violent life he had led. Hardin was shot in the back of the head by John Selman, a constable of El Paso, following a heated argument. This abrupt end at the age of 42 marked the final close to a life marked by bloodshed and notoriety. John Wesley Hardin's legacy is a complex tapestry woven from fact and fiction. He is remembered as one of the deadliest gunslingers of the Old West, a man whose name became synonymous with the era's lawlessness and violence. His life story has been romanticized and embellished over the years, contributing to the myth of the Wild West. Hardin's legacy extends beyond his death, influencing the Western genre in literature and film. He is often depicted as a quintessential outlaw, a symbol of rebellion against authority, and a product of the harsh realities of frontier life. His life has been the subject of numerous books, movies, and songs, each adding layers to the legend. The challenge in examining Hardin's legacy lies in separating the man from the myth. Much of what is known about him comes from his own accounts and second-hand stories, many of which are exaggerated or apocryphal. Historians and enthusiasts have long debated the accuracy of these tales, attempting to discern the true nature of his character. Despite the embellishments, there is no denying Hardin's skill with a gun and his propensity for violence. His numerous gunfights and the sheer number of people he claimed to have killed attest to a life lived in constant conflict. However, understanding the man behind the myth requires a careful examination of the context in which he lived. John Wesley Hardin's influence on pop culture and the Western genre is significant. He embodies the archetype of the troubled outlaw, a man shaped by his environment, walking the fine line between heroism and villainy. His story has been a source of fascination and inspiration, contributing to the enduring allure of the Wild West narrative. In reflecting on Hardin's life, one can see a man who was a product of his time. Born into an era of turmoil and change, he navigated a path defined by violence and rebellion. His life story is a window into the complexities of the American frontier, a testament to the harsh realities of a period marked by conflict and transformation. Debunking myths, separating fact from fiction. John Wesley Hardin's life, steeped in violence and notoriety, has been the subject of many tales and legends. Over the years, these stories have woven a complex tapestry of myth and reality, creating a larger-than-life figure of the Old West. This chapter aims to dissect these myths, separating the embellishments from the factual to better understand the true character of Hardin. One of the most enduring myths about Hardin is the number of men he killed. Estimates range wildly, with some accounts suggesting he killed over 40 men. However, historical evidence does not support these claims. While Hardin was undoubtedly involved in numerous gunfights and killings, the actual number is likely much lower. This exaggeration is a common feature in tales of the Old West, where the line between fact and folklore is often blurred. Another myth that has persisted is the portrayal of Hardin as a Robin Hood-like figure, who stood against oppression and fought for the common man. This romanticized view contrasts sharply with historical accounts, which depict him more as a self-serving outlaw than a champion of the oppressed. Hardin's violence was often personal, driven by personal vendettas or self-preservation, rather than any altruistic motives. Hardin's reputation as the fastest and most accurate gunslinger of his time is a central aspect of his legend. While he was undoubtedly skilled with a firearm, the notion of him being the fastest is difficult to substantiate. Gunfights in the Old West were chaotic and often more about luck and circumstance than sheer skill. The idea of a quick-draw duel, as popularized in Western movies, is largely a fabrication of Hollywood rather than historical reality. Many of Hardin's supposed escapes and adventures, as recounted in his autobiography and other sources, are likely exaggerated or even fabricated. These stories were often told for entertainment and self-aggrandizement, a common practice among outlaws of the era who sought to cultivate a legendary status. Critical examination of these tales often reveals inconsistencies and improbable details. The portrayal of Hardin as a man constantly at odds with the law feeds into the myth of the lawless West. While Hardin did have numerous encounters with law enforcement, the idea of the Old West as a place devoid of law and order is an oversimplification. There were functioning legal systems and societal structures, even though they might have been rudimentary or corrupt at times. The narrative of Hardin's supposed conversion and reform during his time in prison is another aspect that warrants scrutiny. While Hardin did engage in some level of self-improvement, including studying law, it is unclear how deep this transformation was. His later actions, including his return to a life of violence after release, suggest that any change in his character was at best partial. The myths surrounding John Wesley Hardin have significantly influenced pop culture and the Western genre. His legend has been perpetuated in movies, books, and songs, often with little regard for historical accuracy. This romanticized version of Hardin's life has contributed to the mythologizing of the Old West, presenting a distorted view of the era. In reflecting on the myths surrounding John Wesley Hardin, it becomes clear that his legend is a product of both his own actions and the era's fascination with sensational stories. The blending of fact and fiction in his life story is indicative of the broader narrative of the Old West, where legends were often built on a foundation of hyperbole and half-truths. The changing landscape of the Old West, Hardin's place in history. This chapter delves into the broader context of the Old West during John Wesley Hardin's lifetime, examining how the shifting cultural, political, and social landscape shaped his life and legacy. Hardin's story is not just an isolated tale of a notorious gunslinger, but is deeply intertwined with the transformation of the American frontier. Hardin's early life and criminal career unfolded during a period of significant change in the United States. The aftermath of the Civil War brought about Reconstruction, altering the social and political fabric of the nation, particularly in the South and West. Texas, Hardin's home, was a melting pot of these changes, grappling with the fallout of the war, the end of slavery, and the push towards modernization. This turbulent backdrop played a crucial role in shaping Hardin's worldview. The violence and lawlessness that marked this era were not just the backdrop of his life, but were integral to his development and actions. Hardin's story is a window into the challenges and conflicts of a region in the throes of transformation. Hardin's legend is a manifestation of the myth of the Wild West, a concept characterized by lawlessness, gunfights, and rugged individualism. While elements of this myth are based in reality, the Old West was also a place of community, cooperation, and complex social networks. Hardin's life and actions, often portrayed as emblematic of the Wild West, were actually more reflective of the exceptions rather than the rule in this diverse and evolving landscape. The concept of frontier justice, where personal vendettas and gunfights were common means of resolving disputes, played a significant role in Hardin's life. This form of justice was partly a result of the inadequate legal systems in many frontier areas. Hardin's numerous gunfights and his reputation as a feared gunslinger can be viewed within this context of a society where legal recourse was often limited or non-existent. The latter half of the 19th century was a time of significant economic and technological changes. The expansion of railroads, the growth of cattle ranching, and the influx of settlers transformed the landscape of the West. These changes brought new challenges and opportunities, influencing the lives of individuals like Hardin. His encounters with lawmen, cattle drives, and involvement in local conflicts were all reflective of these broader changes.